Clara had worked in Walter's home for 10 years. 10 years. She had cleaned his floors every morning before the sun came up. She had pressed his shirts so that not a single crease remained. She had served his guests with quiet grace, and she had kept his house running so smoothly that Walter himself sometimes forgot it needed running at all. And for every single one of those 10 years, Clara had carried a secret that could have destroyed Walter completely. His enemies would have paid a great deal of money for it. The newspapers would have printed it on their front pages. The people who had spent years trying to bring him down would have used it without mercy. Clara knew all of this, and she never told a single soul, not his enemies, not his closest friends, not even his own daughter. This is the story of the most faithful silence in the world, and what it truly cost her to keep it. To understand this story, you must first understand who Walter was. Walter was not a man who had been handed anything in this life. He had grown up with very little, in a small house, in a small town, where people knew his name only because his father had once owed everyone money. Walter had carried that embarrassment through his childhood, like a stone in his shoe, every single day. So, he made himself a promise. He would build something so large, so solid, so undeniable that no one would ever look at him the way they had looked at his father. And he kept that promise. By the time Walter was 58 years old, his name meant something in the world. His business empire stretched across 4 countries. His face appeared on the covers of important magazines. When he walked into a room, people straightened in their chairs. When he spoke, people wrote down what he said. Walter had built exactly what he promised himself he would build. But there was something behind the empire. Something behind the confidence and the sharp suits and the firm handshakes. Something that only showed itself late at night when the house was quiet and the guests were gone and Walter was completely alone. A grief so deep and so private that he had never spoken of it to another living person. He kept it in a locked room at the end of the east hallway. Nobody in the house ever asked about that room. The other staff had learned quietly and quickly that it was not a subject that was raised. If a new worker asked, an older one would simply shake their head and change the subject. The room stayed locked, and Walter's secret stayed inside it. Clara came to work for Walter 10 years ago, in the month of October. She was 51 years old at the time, a widow. Her children were grown and had moved away to build their own lives. And Clara found that her house felt very large and very quiet without them. She had always been a woman who needed to be useful. Stillness did not suit her, so she took the position at Walter's estate. She was good at her work from the very first day, careful, thorough, quiet in the way that good workers are quiet, not because they have nothing to say, but because they understand when saying nothing is the greater kindness. On her 4th day, she made a mistake. It was a simple mistake, an honest one. She was carrying fresh linens down the east hallway, and she pushed open the wrong door. She stepped inside before she understood where she was. The room was small, much smaller than she expected. There was no desk, no furniture, no storage, just a low wooden table against the far wall, and on that table photographs, dozens of them, all of the same child, a little boy with wide dark eyes and a smile so bright it seemed to light up every photograph he was in. Between the photographs, a few small things. A child's drawing, carefully framed. A pair of tiny worn shoes. A folded piece of paper that looked as though it had been read and refolded many, many times. Clara stood very still. And then she heard a sound. Walter was in the corner of the room, sitting in a low chair she had not seen when she first entered. He had his face in his hands. His shoulders were moving slowly. He was weeping. Not dramatically, not loudly. The quiet, exhausted weeping of a man who has been carrying something heavy for a very long time. He had not heard her come in. Clara looked at this powerful, feared, respected man. She looked at the photographs of the little boy. She looked at the tiny, worn shoes on the table. And without making a sound, she stepped back out of the room. She pulled the door closed behind her, gently, completely. She stood in the hallway for a moment, with her hand still on the door handle. Then she picked up her linens and continued down the hall. She never spoke of what she had seen. Not that day. Not in the 10 years that followed. For 10 years, life in Walter's house continued as it always had. Walter built his empire. He attended important meetings and gave important speeches and shook the hands of important people. He was admired and respected and occasionally feared. He had enemies, as powerful men always do. But none of them had ever been able to find the crack in his armor. One of those enemies was Senator Harold. Senator Harold was a careful man, patient in the way that truly dangerous people are patient. He had been watching Walter for years, waiting for a mistake, a weakness, a door left open somewhere that he could walk through. He had never found one, so he hired someone to look harder. Clara was at the market on a Tuesday morning, choosing vegetables for the week, when a man appeared beside her. He was well-dressed, pleasant-looking, the kind of man who worked very hard to seem harmless. He told her his name. She forgot it immediately, which was not an accident. He said he was doing some research. He said he was interested in Walter's personal life. He said he had heard that Clara had worked in the house for a long time and that she was a trustworthy woman and that he hoped, perhaps, she might be willing to share a few small details. He placed an envelope on the vegetable stand beside her hand. It was thick. Clara looked at the envelope. She looked at the man. She thought about the locked room and the little worn shoes and a powerful man weeping alone in a chair. She picked up a bunch of carrots. She placed the envelope back in the man's hand without looking at him, and she moved to the next stall. The man did not follow her. Clara finished her shopping and walked home. She did not tell Walter what had happened. Not yet. 3 weeks later, he came back. This time he found her in the park near the estate, where Clara sometimes sat on her afternoon break with a cup of tea and a library book. He sat down on the bench beside her without being invited. He was more direct this time. He told her the amount of money in the new envelope. It was significantly larger than the first. He told her that Walter would never find out, that she had been loyal long enough, that 10 years was more than anyone could ask of a person, that no one would blame her, that she deserved something for herself after all this time. He said no one will ever know. Clara closed her book. She sat quietly for a moment. Then she said 4 words. She said, "I would know." She stood up from the bench. She picked up her tea. She walked back toward the house. She did not look back. That evening, Clara knocked on the door of Walter's study. She had never done this before. In 10 years, she had always waited to be called. Walter looked up from his desk, surprised. Clara stood in the doorway. She did not come inside. She said, very simply and very calmly, that someone was watching the house, that a man had approached her twice now, that questions were being asked, that Walter should be careful. Walter put down his pen. He looked at her for a long moment. He asked her how she knew. Clara said only that she had noticed. Walter nodded once. He did not say thank you. He never did. Clara went back to the kitchen. Now, before we go any further, you deserve to know the full truth. The truth that Clara had carried alone for 10 years. 23 years ago, when Walter was still building his empire and his name was just beginning to mean something, he fell in love. Her name was Miriam. She was a quiet, beautiful woman who worked as a teacher in a small school near one of Walter's early offices. They were together for 2 years. Deeply, genuinely happy in the way that people sometimes are before the world gets complicated. Then Miriam became pregnant. Walter wanted to tell the world. He wanted to stand up and say, "This is my family. This is my life. This is the thing I am most proud of." But Miriam was afraid. Walter was becoming famous. The newspapers were beginning to pay attention to him. Miriam had seen what happened to the families of powerful men when the cameras found them. She had seen the stories, the intrusions, the cruelty. She asked Walter to keep the child a secret, not because she was ashamed, but because she wanted her son to have a quiet, ordinary, protected childhood. She wanted him to be a boy, just a boy, not a headline. Walter agreed, because he loved her, and because he trusted her instincts more than his own ambitions. The boy was born in the spring. His name was James. He had Walter's eyes and Miriam's smile, And from the very first moment Walter held him, he understood that everything he had built meant nothing compared to this. Walter was there for every birthday, every school play, every quiet Sunday afternoon, always privately, always carefully, always without the world knowing. James was a gentle, curious, joyful child. He was also sick. He had been born with a condition that affected his heart. The doctors were honest with Walter and Miriam from the beginning. They said James would need care all his life. They said there would be good years and hard years. They said to enjoy every good day fully. Walter paid for every treatment, every specialist, every hospital. He did it quietly, through channels that could not be traced back to him, because that was what Miriam had asked and what James deserved. The good years were very good. James grew. He laughed. He drew pictures and asked endless questions and loved books about the ocean. He called Walter Dad in a voice so easy and natural that it made Walter's chest ache every single time. James passed away just before his 9th birthday. It was a Tuesday morning in March. Walter was with him. After that, Walter built the locked room. He put James's photographs on the table. He put the drawings on the wall. He put the tiny worn shoes, the ones James had worn every day, the summer he turned 6, and refused to wear any others, in the center of the table where Walter could see them when he sat in the chair. He went to that room whenever the weight of the secret became too heavy to carry through the rest of the house. He had been going there alone for 13 years, when Clara accidentally opened the wrong door. And Clara had carried that knowledge ever since. She had carried it the way you carry something that does not belong to you. Carefully. Quietly, without ever setting it down in front of someone else. That was Walter's secret. Not a crime, not a scandal, just a father who had loved his son and lost him and never found a way to say it out loud. Senator Harold was not a man who gave up easily. When his investigator reported that Clara could not be bought, Harold changed his approach. He took what little he had, fragments, rumors, the fact of the locked room that the investigator had noted from the outside, and he went to a journalist he trusted to be unkind. The story ran on a Thursday morning. It was not the truth. It was not even close to the truth. It suggested, with careful, vague language, that Walter had a hidden past, a secret family, people he had walked away from, a man who presented one face to the world and kept another face hidden in a locked room in his house. It was enough. By noon, Walter's phone was ringing without stopping. His business partners were calling. His lawyers were calling. The other newspapers were picking up the story and adding their own guesses to it. Walter sat in his study and did not answer a single call. He sat very still, the way Clara had seen him sit in that chair in the locked room. That same stillness, that same heaviness. Diana arrived at the house that afternoon. She was 34 years old, and she was her father's daughter in every way, sharp, direct, unafraid of difficult conversations. But when she walked through the front door and found her father sitting in his study, with his phone ringing and his hands folded on the desk in front of him, she felt something she had never felt before. She felt afraid for him. She sat across from him. She asked him to tell her what was happening. Walter looked at his daughter for a long time. Then he said, "Not yet." Just those 2 words. Not yet. Diana did not push. She sat with him in silence instead, because that was what the moment asked for, and Diana was wise enough to know it. That evening, Clara found Diana sitting alone in the garden. The sun was going down. The air was cool. Diana was sitting very straight in her chair, the way people sit when they are trying very hard to hold themselves together. Clara sat down beside her. She did not ask for permission. She did not apologize for the interruption. She simply sat down, folded her hands in her lap, and said, "I need to tell you something about your father." Diana looked at her. Clara said, "What I am about to tell you is something I have never told anyone. In 10 years, I have not spoken a word of it, but you need to hear it. And I believe your father needs you to hear it. Even if he cannot bring himself to say it to you himself." Diana was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Tell me." Clara told her everything. She told it slowly, carefully, The way you carry something precious across a long distance with both hands and all your attention. She told Diana about Miriam, about two people who were genuinely happy before the world got complicated, about a quiet, deliberate choice to protect a child from the noise of a famous father's life. She told Diana about James, about his wide, dark eyes and his bright smile, about the ocean books and the drawings, about the tiny worn shoes that a little boy had loved so fiercely one summer that nothing else would do. She told Diana about the illness, about the good years and the hard years, about a father who had paid for every doctor and every treatment through careful, quiet channels because that was the promise he had made to the woman he loved. She told Diana about the Tuesday morning in March. She told Diana about the locked room. Diana did not speak for a long time after Clara finished. She sat very still, looking at her hands in her lap. Her shoulders were trembling slightly, not from cold. Then she said, "He never told anyone." Clara said, "No." Diana said, "Not even you. You found out by accident." Clara said, "Yes." Diana said, "And you kept it for 10 years." Clara said, "It was not mine to tell." Diana looked at this woman, this quiet, steady, faithful woman who had sat beside her in a garden at sunset and handed her the most precious and painful thing her father had ever owned. She said, "Why are you telling me now?" Clara said, "Because the wrong story is spreading, and the right story deserves to be heard. And because your father has been carrying this alone for 20 years. And no one should carry something like that alone for 20 years. She paused. She said, "He needs you, Diana. He just does not know how to say so." Diana called the press conference for the following morning. She did not tell her father she was doing it. She was afraid that if she told him, he would stop her. And she understood, in a way she could not fully explain, that this was something that needed to happen whether Walter was ready or not. She stood alone at the podium. No lawyers beside her. No assistants, no prepared statement from a public relations team. Just Diana, in a simple, dark dress, with her father's eyes. She said, "I want to tell you about my brother." The room went completely quiet. She said, "His name was James. He was born 23 years ago to a woman named Miriam, who loved him more than anything in the world. His father, my father, loved him just as much. And they made a choice together, the two of them, to keep James out of the public eye. Not out of shame, not out of dishonesty, but out of love. Because they wanted their son to have a quiet life. Because they wanted him to be a boy, just a boy, and not a story." She paused. She said, "James passed away when he was 8 years old. My father was with him. My father paid for every doctor, every treatment, every specialist, through all the years of James's life. He did it quietly, because that was the promise he had made to Miriam. He has never broken that promise. Not even now." She said, "My father keeps a room in his house for James. There are photographs there, drawings, a pair of shoes that James loved when he was 6 years old. My father goes to that room alone. He has gone there alone for 13 years. Because he had no one to grieve with. Because the secret that protected his son in life left my father without a single person to share the grief with after." Her voice did not shake. Not once. She said, "That is my father's secret. That is the hidden past that has been reported with such satisfaction this week. A man who loved his son, a man who kept his word, a man who has been grieving alone, quietly and faithfully, for 13 years." She stepped back from the podium. Several journalists in the room had set down their pens. One of them, near the back, was wiping her eyes. Walter watched the press conference from his study. He had found out what Diana was doing 30 minutes before it began. He had sat down in his chair and watched his daughter stand at that podium and speak the words he had never been able to say out loud himself. He did not move for a long time after it ended. He sat in the quiet of his study while the world outside began to shift. His phone was ringing again, but differently now. His lawyers called to say the narrative had changed. His business partners called to express something that sounded, unexpectedly, like sympathy. 2 of the newspapers that had run the original story called to say they were publishing corrections. Walter did not answer any of them. He got up from his desk. He walked down the east hallway. He unlocked the door at the end of it and went inside. He sat in the low chair. He looked at the photographs of James for a long time. Then he did something he had not done in years. He said James's name out loud. Just once. Just quietly. In a room that finally felt less like a secret and more like a memorial. Later that evening, Walter found Clara in the kitchen. She was washing the dinner dishes. The kitchen was warm and smelled of the soup she had made earlier, and the sound of the water running was the only sound in the room. Walter stood in the doorway. Clara kept washing. She did not turn around. But her hands slowed slightly, the way hands do when you know someone is watching. Walter said, "You told Diana." Clara said, "Yes." Walter was quiet for a moment. He said, "Why?" Clara turned off the water. She dried her hands on a cloth. She turned to look at him. She said, "Because she is your daughter, and because you have been alone with this for too long, and because the wrong story was going to spread and become the story people remembered. And James deserved better than that." Walter looked at her. He said, "You have known for 10 years." Clara said, "Yes." He said, "And you never told anyone?" "Not in 10 years." Clara said, "It was not mine to tell." Walter stood in the doorway of his kitchen for a long moment. This powerful, feared, admired man. This man who had built an empire with his own hands and carried a grief with his own heart and never let either one show. He said, "Thank you, Clara." 2 words. After 10 years. Clara nodded once. She turned back to the sink. She turned the water back on, and Walter stood in the doorway for just a moment longer, as if he was not quite ready to leave the warmth of that kitchen, and then he walked quietly back down the hall. The next morning, Walter knocked on the door of Diana's old bedroom, where she had stayed the night. She opened it in her robe, still half asleep, her hair loose. Walter said, "Come with me." Diana followed him down the east hallway. She had never been down this hallway before. Not once in all the years she had visited this house. It was one of those unspoken things that families sometimes have a part of the house that everyone quietly agrees not to enter. Walter stopped at the door at the end of the hall. He took out his key. He unlocked it. He pushed it open. And then he stepped back so that Diana could go in first. Diana walked into the room slowly. She looked at the photographs on the table. She looked at the drawings on the wall. She looked at the tiny worn shoes in the center of the table, sitting exactly where someone had placed them, with great care. She looked at all the evidence of a little boy who had been deeply loved. She was quiet for a long time. Then she picked up one of the photographs. A little boy on a beach somewhere, laughing at something outside the frame, his arms spread wide like he was trying to hold all the air in the world. She said, "He looks like you." Walter said, "He had his mother's smile." Diana set the photograph back down carefully. She reached across and took her father's hand. Walter did not cry. For the first time in 13 years, standing in that room, he did not cry, because he was not alone in it anymore. 3 days later, Walter asked Clara to come to his study. She sat across the desk from him, something she had never done before. In 10 years, she had always stood. But Walter gestured to the chair, and Clara sat, folding her hands in her lap the way she always did. Walter placed a document on the desk between them. He told her it was a trust, a financial arrangement. He had set aside enough money that Clara would never have to work again if she did not want to. Enough to care for herself, in comfort, for the rest of her life. Enough to help her children and her grandchildren if they ever needed it. He said, "You have given me 10 years of loyalty that I did not earn and did not deserve. This does not repay it. Nothing could repay it, but I want you to have it." Clara looked at the document. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Walter, I did not keep your secret for money." Walter looked at her steadily. He said, "I know." He paused. He said, "That is exactly why." Clara looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at the document on the desk. She said, "May I still come to work, if I choose to?" Walter said, "This is your home, Clara, for as long as you want it to be." Clara nodded. She picked up the document. She folded it carefully and placed it in her apron pocket. She stood up from the chair. She said, "Dinner will be ready at 7." And she walked back to the kitchen. There are people in this world who know things about us, things we have never told anyone, things we have buried deep and locked away and carried alone through years and years of ordinary days. Our private shames, our hidden griefs, the things that live behind closed doors that we never invite anyone through. And sometimes, if we are very fortunate, there is someone like Clara, someone who stumbled upon our secret by accident, someone who looked at the most vulnerable, most unguarded, most human version of us and made a quiet decision not to use it, not to sell it, not to share it over coffee with someone who did not deserve to hear it, but simply to close the door and walk away and never speak of it again. Not because they were paid to, not because they were threatened, but because they understood, in the deepest part of themselves, that what they had seen was not theirs to carry into the world. I would know. 4 words. In those 4 words, Clara said everything. She said that her integrity was not for sale, that her loyalty was not a performance for Walter's benefit, but a standard she held herself to because of who she was, not because of who was watching. True loyalty does not require an audience. True loyalty is what you choose in the quiet moments. In the market, with an envelope of money in front of you. In the park, with a persuasive voice beside you. In 10 years of ordinary mornings, when no one would have known and no one would have blamed you, Clara chose it every single time. Not for a reward, not for recognition, but because I would know. Think about the people in your life who have kept your secrets, who have seen you at your most unguarded and chosen silence, who have carried something of yours with more care than you even knew. Do they know that you see them? Do they know that you are grateful? Do not wait 10 years to say thank you. Say it today. While there is still time, thank you so much for listening to this story. I have a question for you, and I would truly love to hear your answer in the comments below. Have you ever kept a secret to protect someone you cared about, even when it was hard? Even when no one would have known if you had told it? Tell me about it. I would love to hear your story. If this story moved your heart, please share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you are new to this channel, welcome. There are many more stories here waiting for you. Subscribe so you never miss one. Until next time, take care of yourselves and take care of the Claras in your life.